Okay, so we finished the first part of the video, and then this is the second part of the video. It should pick up right about where the last video ended. All right, here we go.
We're focusing on the core character options of the game, especially character classes, which means we also have, in the end, there will be a total of 48 subclasses that will appear in this playtest process. 4 for each of the game's 12 classes. We also are going to share with DMs new encounter building rules aimed at making it easier to prep, and even more, monster customization options, things that will make it easier for DMs to run this game. And so
I mean, that's, easier to do that kind of stuff. I know currently in 5e, everything, there's charts and stuff in the Dungeon Master's Guide and stuff like that. You got to add in experience and plug in the modifiers into the equation and how many players there are in the group and what level they are, and yeah, it's complicated. But there's a million online tools to do that for you. So you just say, I want this guy, and this guy. That's a medium encounter. That's about where I want it. That's a hard encounter. That's about where I want it. Or I'd like it to be a hard encounter. Let's add a couple more of these guys. Yeah, we're good. So like building those, as long as you know how to use Google and search for something online, it's pretty easy to find tools to do that already. Now I know they're going to leverage the internet a lot more in this next version, the online tools a lot more in this next version. So I mean, that's good. It's always good to make it easier to manage that stuff, but it's never been particularly difficult. 5th edition from Jump Street had plenty of tools out there that could be used to do this kind of stuff. So, and in my 9-to-5 job as a computer programmer, I've built many programs myself just to use at home to do things like building encounters and test different things out. It's not world-shaking information.
There is a whole lot ahead of us. Also mixed in will be new versions of things that appear in the playtest, because a critical part of this is we send things out, we get feedback, things that didn't score particularly well, we do new versions, we send those out, we get feedback on that. It's a process that is already bearing fruit. The feedback that people have given is already improving what's going on here, both at the macro level with things like the Dragonborn and the Ardling, but also on the micro level, because since we dig into the written feedback that is provided, people are already telling us great things about wording in the rules glossary, for instance, that might be unclear to them. And so that's the playtest process.
I did mention several things.
Like, aha,
in my survey that the wording was unclear.
Meaning that when we get finally to the books in a couple of years, we will have been able to refine the wording of the rules, the character options, the DM options, incorporating feedback from tens of thousands of people.
And this is very clear why it's so important for everyone to play test it and then give that feedback, because it's clearly changing the process as we go.
Absolutely. And it's even valuable to us if, say, a person doesn't have time to play test. It's still valuable for us to get feedback on the survey just based on the person's reading of the material. Because we can tell when we're reading if feedback is based on real play experience versus first impression on reading. Feedback from both situations is helpful to us. And so I encourage people, if you've at least read it, please fill out the survey. Even better if you've read it and you've tried some of it out in play, because we find all of our perceptions change once we get to the game table and we're rolling dice.
I think it becomes difficult. I would venture a guess that probably 80 to 90% of all the feedback they got were from people that didn't play the play test. just their impressions from reading it. And I say that because a lot of the people that are the most interested in this kind of stuff are the people that are super into Dungeons and Dragons, and those are the people that, are the ones that are going to get roped into running the adventures, not playing them. I know that at my tables, I'm the only one that's really read the playtest material. I have one other guy that I play with that has at least joined me on Twitch and gone over some of the stuff and talked about some of the changes that were made and our impressions of it. But of all the groups that I play in, none of the dungeon masters, I think, would be super open to me using the playtest material in a game with non-playtest characters or with people that aren't familiar with it, partially because the dungeon master's also not familiar with it. Whereas me being familiar with it, because I am the dungeon master and I am doing this and making videos and reading the playtest material and am super excited for all of it, I would be super fine with any of my players playing these characters. And I have one that is playing an orc, but from the playtest material. But that's just one guy, and I don't think he filled out a playtest survey. He just asked me to print him out the information so that he could make himself an orc. So, I doubt he filled out a survey. So I would guess that 90% of the people that filled out surveys are people that did not actually playtest it. Simply because the difficulties that I just mentioned. So I wonder if they'll tell us, if they have that information, how many people actually played the material.
But again, all of the feedback is helpful.
This is something that's come up a bit with the playtest material. If there is something absent, like the use object action or like Eldritch Blast, does that mean that that's not going to exist?
So that is a great question. And what I think is important to understand about the playtest is we're presenting a version of something and asking what people think of it with the assumption that if something doesn't appear in the playtest, it's still in the game. So people have rightly noticed that the Eldritch Blast spell has not appeared on any of the spell lists thus far. Eldritch Blast has not been removed from the game. It just means it's not on those spell lists. And when we get to the Mage Unearthed Arcana, people will get to see what we're doing with Eldritch Blast in the Warlock.
Warlock
similarly,
only spell.
The use an object action, and actually several actions have not appeared.
I would guess that the Eldritch Blast becomes not a spell, but an ability. That's my prediction. Eldritch Blast is no longer a spell, it's an ability. Much like, similar to how Hunter's Mark works with the Ranger. So it'll just be an ability that they can do, and then they can, probably get invocations like they can in 5th edition that can alter the way it works. But yeah, I mean, obviously, just because it wasn't listed in the first 2 playtest material documents doesn't mean it doesn't exist anymore, because we only saw 3 classes. So we know the other 9 classes are still going to be there. So, I mean, they even referenced one of them that wasn't in there. I think it's pretty obvious that just because it's not in this playtest document, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And again, this is test documents, and we know that this stuff would change anyway.
Yet in the glossary for the playtest. What that means is we're still using the action as it's defined in the 2014 Player's Handbook. Because typically we put things in the glossary only if we've changed the definition in some way, or if it's something that was never fully defined in the 2014 Player's Handbook. Because there are a few rules that didn't appear in the 2014 Player's Handbook, but did appear in the Monster Manual or Dungeon Master's Guide. And essentially our test is, if it didn't appear in the PH, and we want people to test it in the playtest, we put it into the glossary. Similarly, if we've changed it in some way, it goes into the glossary. That means if it's not there,
Don't panic.
it's still in the game until we say it isn't.
Right.
Now, people have rightly noticed that the thief subclass in the previous UA doesn't, as a part of their cunning action enhancement, interact with the use an object action anymore. That's intentional. That wasn't an accidental omission. We removed it from that feature because in the 2014 version of the feature, it fell into an area of mechanics that we sometimes refer to as mother may I mechanics. And what we mean by that is something that is on your character sheet that really only works if the DM cooperates with you in its execution.
Right.
I mean, really,
This
that's
is as
anything.
opposed to most of the features that characters have where you can reliably just use it and it does what it says on the description of the feature.
Right.
And we have found that in general, those sorts of mechanics that kind of require DM permission or buy-in to function properly often end up being unsatisfying, or they end up slowing down the game. And so, for instance, what the thief could actually do with that bonus action, use an object action, caused endless questions, partly because we weren't clear enough in the 2014 rules everything about what all is encompassed by use an object, because we tell you, well, you can use an object with it, but not a magic item, and it's not entirely clear how the equipment in the equipment chapter interacts with that action. All of that is on our list to clear up in this playtest process. But specifically for the thief, we didn't want that to be a part of that feature anymore.
Right.
Now, might the use an object action go away? It might. I'll be upfront about that. But we haven't decided yet. And that will be a decision we come to through the playtest process. And so again, if something is actually going to be removed from the game, we will say so. So again, if it's not present, it just means it's not in the playtest yet, or we're happy with its 2014 implementation.
The journalist in me wants to ask about wild magic sorcery now. Speaking of Mother May I have a wild surge?
And you can expect when we get to the mage classes, and specifically to the sorcerer, we're going to address that. And you also saw in the previous Unearthed Arcana that we addressed that in the Ranger. Because one of the main issues with especially the Ranger's first level features in the 2014 Player's Handbook is they relied way too heavily on DM buy-in. That if your DM really bought into how they functioned, your Ranger could feel at first level super effective and later on feel like you had something to contribute that others didn't.
Right.
But if your DM didn't buy in, you could end up with a situation where you felt like those features didn't even exist in terms of actual play.
Right.
And so we've addressed that in the Ranger. Luckily, that isn't an issue for most of the features in the game, but when we come across them, we want to make sure one of our design goals is if you've got a class feature, you should be able to use it in the way you expect. Now, that still leaves things open for the DM to introduce in the environment, in the cosmos, something strange that alters how things work. But that's a story thing, and that's totally within the DM's purview. That's different from the feature itself basically telling you, well, if the DM buys in, you'll get to use this.
Yeah. Another question that's really common is great weapon fighting and sharpshooter. Mm-hmm. So these feats have damage bonuses, many of which people enjoy, with a little bit more risk-reward kind of action in their mechanics. Why was that changed?
So, yeah, in the 2014 versions of those two feats, they had the damage bonus that you talked about. That was sort of counterbalanced with a penalty to your to-hit roll that you would adopt. Here's the issue. First off, the penalty to the 2-hit roll, especially at higher levels, is not actually big enough to justify that large of a damage bonus. It becomes very easy as you progress to make that -5 to your attack roll.
Which is why so many people take it.
But then there's an even bigger issue. We want our warrior classes in particular to be able to rely on their class features, which, remember, are going to include some of these awesome new weapon options. We want them to be able to rely on those for their main damage output. We do not want any feats to feel like you have to take them to be dealing a satisfying amount of damage. So really the issue with those two feats was twofold. Again, it was too easy to make the penalty to the 2-hit roll trivial, and those two feats with those really enticing damage bonuses in them almost became must-haves. And that for us violates our design goal for feats, which is we always want you to feel good about the feats you took, but we don't want you to feel like you must take particular feats to hit a baseline level of whether it's damage output, or if you're a healer, the amount of healing you do, or if you're an expert and you're much more about versatility. We want you to go to feats because there's a particular angle you want to accentuate, not because you feel like I've got to take this feat to even be able to show up and do my job. So fear not, people who love playing warriors. There is juicy stuff coming in the classes themselves, and that's where we want you to be able to turn reliably to some options where you will.
I mean, okay, so in one hand, great. The classes have some really good features that you rely on for damage. On the other hand, that again kind of makes everything cookie cutter, because you're taking feats to increase your damage. So the fighter class doesn't need to take this feat, but maybe another class would want to take the feat to get the extra damage, to try to catch up on damage with the fighter. I mean, so a barbarian has some ability that gives him a huge amount of extra damage, but the ranger can't take that. I mean, I guess that's fine. I mean, the fighter class should be good at fighting. So, I mean, I guess that makes a certain amount of sense. But by weakening some of the feats, I think it makes it so that classes aren't reliant on them. It makes them less exciting feats to take. When I hit level 4, I get a feat, I get this huge boost to my character. If you take that boost and put it in the classes, then when you get your feat at level 4, you're like, all right, I get this little boost. It makes gaining those feats that are an exciting part about min-maxing your character or customizing your character, or however you want to say it. It makes the excitement of getting those feats a little bit less exciting. Now, I do, with that said, think that Sharpshooter and Great Weapon Master, and to a slightly lesser extent, Polearm Master, were huge feats that were enormously overpowered. So I don't have a problem with those coming down to earth a little bit. It'll be interesting to see what the final versions of some of those are, I think. And we get another fantastic face. He's an angry pirate.
Be dishing out the damage. And again, that's one of the reasons why I'm really looking forward to when we release that UA.
So there's another one. There's the light weapon property and having to do with bonus actions. Are we going to see other changes like this, and why was this changed?
So the light weapon property, we really amped it up by removing the bonus action requirement. It's now you get this extra attack simply as a part of the attack action.
Is that because of the threading of everything going through a bonus action?
Yes, because, and I think we might have talked about this in our video about this UA, requiring...
I did a numbers breakdown on the 5e Ranger versus the next version of Ranger, and I did not find the difference to be huge. I found it to be... I think it came out to be about 5 points of damage different, depending on the round. A lot of times it wasn't even a difference at all, freeing up the bonus action by using this ability.
Light weapon users to use their bonus action to
Yeah.
get that extra attack meant that there were a lot of bad combinations with class features that also required bonus actions, spells that required bonus actions. It meant that people who really like the fantasy of, fighting with two light weapons were sort of having to pay attacks that other weapon users were not having to pay. And so that's why we made that change, because we noticed over time that that tax on light weapon use was actually causing us to sort of distort design decisions elsewhere. Like, we started flinching away from using the bonus action in a few cases, even though the bonus action was the most natural design choice, because then we're like, well, but then this will be rough for people who are using light weapons. So the playtest is a time for us where we can finally, how about we just fix the light weapon property so that it stops causing these ripples in the design
I think it was a good
environment,
change. I just don't
so that a light
think that
weapon
it
user
really
can
made
use these other
much of a
options just as
damage
well as somebody
difference.
else. So when, again, we get to
Like I said, 5 points of damage on average for the Ranger
explore the new weapon
on some
options,
rounds.
we're also going to explore possibly tweaking some of the other weapon properties. But our focus is going to be more on these brand new options. And again, we'll talk more about that in the months ahead.
Another one of these things that came up
Teaser.
was class spell lists. Are these going away forever?
That's an open question. So our focus right now is getting everyone used to the 3 big spell lists. The arcane.
Okay, now I have something to say about this. The 3 big spell lists, they're still class spell lists because the classes themselves limit which schools of magic which in there you could use. So yes, you have access to the arcane spell list, but only conjuration and abjuration, and they limit which ones within there you can. So the list of spells available to each spellcaster is different. And so no matter how you slice it, if each class has a different list of spells they can do, then they're still class spell lists. You can label it however you want, do whatever you want to do, they're still class spell lists. Just because you've lumped some of them together by excluding some from one class and excluding others from another class, you've still got different lists of spells available to each class. Disingenuous. Bad on you.
Arcane list, the primal list, and the divine list. Now, in the expert classes UA, we saw the bard and the ranger interacting with those lists, but with some sort of exceptions. Each of them could pick only certain spells from
So they
whatever
have different
list they were
lists
going
of
to.
spells for their class.
And we've definitely seen the feedback that for those 2 classes, it would be nice if they still had a class list that basically summarized what they can pick from the master list. We're definitely open to doing that. But what we really wanted to do is focus initially on showing people sort of how they get their spells from the master list, and we will definitely, as we build the books, look at ways to make the spell selection process even easier, and there's a good chance that will mean like the bard will have just a list that simply compiles all the spells that the bard can choose from. Now, there are going to be other classes, though, where that won't be necessary. And people are going to see that in the cleric, because the cleric can simply choose from the entire divine spell list. You're going to see that also with the wizard, who can choose from the entire arcane list. So it's going to be a class-by-class decision we make, and it will really come down to, is it too much of a headache to go through the list and then manually as a player exclude certain schools? And I could definitely see
it's
that
pretty easy to do in a program.
Likely to give that class its own list.
If you're going to exclude
really
spells from certain classes, you might as well have a separate list.
The master list. But then, if a class like the cleric or the wizard can choose from an entire list, there'll be no need for us to have a class-specific list for them. This, by the way, is a part of the philosophy we've had all along for 5th edition. And that is, we're always looking to do what is right for a particular class. So, what works for the bard may not work for the wizard. What works for the cleric may not work for the druid. And so we will, especially as we transition from this playtest and development process into building the actual books, look at making sort of user interface decisions that make the life of the players who play each class as friction-free as possible.
Has this been exciting for you? Because like 5th edition was around so long, and we've got one D&D taking this building off of that. Like there must have been stuff like you start picking up on year over year that you're like, oh, if only we could tweak it.
Well, it is super exciting for me because,
I mean, this is still 5th edition. If everything from 5th edition can still be played, it's still 5th edition. You can call it whatever you want. It's still 5th edition. You couldn't play 4th edition characters in a 5th edition campaign. You couldn't play 3rd edition characters in a 4th edition campaign or a 5th edition campaign. That's what makes the versions different, is that they aren't compatible. This is not a new version of D&D. This is, I mean, every supplement that came out changed some of the rules. It's ridiculous to say that, well, this is a new version because we changed some rules. Well, that's what you did with every single supplement that came out. So I don't know why that annoys me so much to call this a new version of D&D. This isn't even 5.5. This is like 5.2. Like they didn't even make as many changes as they did. Well, in the playtest material so far, they haven't made as many changes as they did going from 3rd edition to 3.5. It just really grinds my gears.
I love this game. I love the game we've all been playing together for the last 8 years. But there are also things that I know could be faster, have more options, be clearer, have fewer places where you feel forced to make certain decisions. And so we're now able to address all of that through this process, continuing the conversation that we started with the D&D community, back with the D&D Next playtest process. And yeah, I am jazzed that we are going to continue this conversation for more than a year ahead of us. And that I think is a great note to end on today, is just to invite everyone to buckle in. This is
It's a good note to end on. You're the interviewee, not the interviewer. The interviewer may have more questions.
It's going to be a long conversation.
Yeah.
We're going to see different versions of things. If you spot something that's unclear, that's not resonating with you, please let us know in the survey, because we're reading your feedback. We're already making improvements based on it. That is the process working as intended. It's meant to be a back and forth that will result in new versions of the core books that all of us as a community can be excited about.
So we really appreciate the comments, and we appreciate any commentary on social media as well. But if you want your voice heard, the best way to do that is the survey.
Absolutely.
Filling out the survey is the most important part. We're not able to look at every single comment that has been made on this video or on social media. The best way is, if you really want to affect the future of D&D, download the playtest material and then fill out that survey.
Yes, because we have multiple members of our design team dedicated to going through survey responses. And so that is your direct conduit to our design team, is filling out those surveys.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
All right, well, that was interesting. I certainly had a lot to say about it. I'm looking forward to the next playtest material document that comes out. If you agreed with anything I said or disagreed with anything that I said during this reaction, I'd love to hear about it down in the comments. I'd like to hear your thoughts on some stuff. In fact, throughout this video, several times I commented I would like to talk to some of the people that answered negatively to some of this or what have you. I'd love to hear that down in the comments too. I'm thinking it looks like probably the next playtest material is coming out tomorrow, December 1st. And so we're going to take a look at a lot of that. And we'll go from there. I'll probably have to break this into a couple videos, but I think we're good. So keep on hacking the dungeon.